The COBIT 5 Foundation Certificate. Module 2. The COBIT 5 Principles. Lesson 5. Principle 4. Enabling a Holistic Approach. Welcome to Module 2, Lesson 5. In this lesson, we'll study COBIT 5 Principle 4, Enabling a Holistic Approach. Topics include the COBIT 5 Enablers, Enabler Dimensions, and Enabler Performance Management. Let's begin by clarifying what enablers are and why they are important. The COBIT definition is: enablers are factors that individually and collectively influence whether something will work. In this case, governance and management over enterprise IT. Each enabler has a goal that is driven by the goal's cascade. If the enablers are not present, or they are deficient in quality or quantity, then the enterprise objectives will be compromised. The diagram on your screen shows the 7 categories of enablers defined in COBIT. At the center are principles, policies, and frameworks. These translate the purpose and core values of the enterprise into practical guidance. For example, they might define how the enterprise expects decisions and trade-offs to be managed. This enabler provides overall direction and guidance for each of the others. A key thing to understand is that these enablers are not independent of one another. A process is a set of related activities that achieve specific objectives, including the production of defined outputs. COBIT describes 37 processes. COBIT describes organizational structures as key decision-making entities. Typical entities include committees and roles. The organizational structure is the means by which the enterprise manages and delegates authority. Each entity has a defined level of authority that defines what it may do. Entities are also a means of apportioning responsibility. Each entity has defined responsibilities, the things it must do. The culture, ethics, and behavior of staff are essential factors for success. They affect the way people and groups interact with each other and with customers and other stakeholders. They represent a set of shared assumptions that guide interpretation and action in enterprises by defining appropriate behavior for various situations. A process, for example, will not deliver the required results if the people executing it have the wrong attitude. Information is the lifeblood of an enterprise. It is essential for all governance, management, and operational activities. The services, infrastructure, and applications support the activities of the enterprise in pursuit of its goals. The final enabler is people and their skills and competencies. The enterprise must have sufficient numbers of staff with the right set of skills if it is to be successful. Skills are needed to perform tasks. Competencies are needed to make decisions, particularly when things don't go to plan. Okay, we've taken a brief look at the 7 enterprise enablers. Before we move on, there's just one more thing to mention about the diagram on your screen. You'll see that the information, services, and people enablers are labeled as resources. The point here is that they are resources of the enterprise and as such must be governed and managed. Our next topic is COBIT 5 Enabler Dimensions. Each enabler has a common set of aspects or dimensions that allow the enablers to be managed successfully and consistently. The diagram on your screen illustrates the 4 generic enabler dimensions: stakeholders, goals, life cycle, and good practices. What this is saying is that each enabler has stakeholders, some internal and some external. Each enabler has goals. Each enabler has a life cycle, and each enabler has good practices. This diagram, its structure and contents are important. You need to be very familiar with them when you take the exam. We'll take a closer look at each of these dimensions over the next few screens. The first enabler dimension we'll look at is stakeholders. In this context, stakeholders are roles that contribute to the enabler, or that depend on it, or have some other interest in it. So, processes have stakeholders who carry out process activities, and others who depend on the outcome of the process or the information that it produces. You learned more about stakeholders in Lesson 1 and 2. You might want to review that material when you've completed this lesson. Each enabler has one or more goals that are derived from the goals cascade that you learned about in Lesson 2. Once again, you will find it useful to review that material when you have completed this lesson. Goals can be related to the outcome of an enabler. Process goals are of this type. Alternatively, the goals can be defined in terms of the application or operation of the enabler itself. For example, a goal for a people enabler would be that staff comply with enterprise security policies. However its goal is defined, the enabler will deliver value if it meets those goals. COBIT finds it useful to categorize goals in 3 ways. Intrinsic quality. This is about the accuracy and objectivity of the enabler and its results. Can we rely on a process, for example, to do what it sets out to do? Can we depend on the people to comply with enterprise policies? Contextual quality. This is about whether the enabler is fit for purpose. Does it deliver what the enterprise needs, or is there a mismatch? For example, is a process delivering the right outcomes? A process might deliver what it has been designed to deliver, intrinsic quality, but it might not be delivering what is needed, contextual quality. The third category of goal is access and security. Are enablers and their outcomes available for use when needed? Are they secure? The third enabler dimension is lifecycle. Each enabler has a lifecycle, as shown on your screen. The stages explain themselves. There are at least 2 key messages here. First, that each enabler is managed in a formal way, starting with requirements gathering and definition, and proceeding through design and implementation to live running. If you have an IT background, then you will see the obvious parallels with the application lifecycle. The second message is that each enabler is subject to a routine review, in other words, continual service improvement. The fourth and final dimension is good practices. Good practices represents the collective wisdom and experience related to a particular enabler. They provide guidance and advice on how best to design and implement the enabler. Some good practices are defined by COBIT. Others come from other complementary frameworks, as we have described in other lessons. This dimension also includes the work product, or inputs and outputs, associated with the enabler. In a later lesson, we'll be looking in some detail at each type of enabler, and you will see some specific issues that good practice must address for each of them. Okay, you've learned about the 4 enabler dimensions. Next, we shall look at managing the performance of the enablers. The diagram on your screen illustrates the performance management framework. You can see that performance should be managed in each of the 4 dimensions. It requires a simple question to be asked of each dimension. For the stakeholder dimension, are the stakeholder needs addressed? For the goals dimension, are the enabler goals achieved? For the lifecycle dimension, is the lifecycle managed? And for the good practices dimension, are good practices applied? In each case, the enterprise should define a set of metrics that will answer the questions posed and provide a basis for further improvement. The enabler metrics are of 2 types, known as lag indicators and lead indicators. Lag indicators are backward-looking. They tell us how well the outcomes of the enabler have been achieved. They give answers to the questions, are stakeholder needs addressed? And are enabler goals achieved? The other type of metric, the lead indicators, tell us about the functioning of the enabler itself. They tell us about the quality of the enabler and, by implication, how we can expect the enabler to function in the future and how much confidence we can invest in it. The lead indicators give answers to the questions, is the life cycle managed? And are good practices applied? Let's do an exercise to develop your understanding of lag and lead indicators. Aim to spend 20 minutes on this exercise, and don't forget to check out your study guide for our ideas. COBIT describes a change management process whose purpose is to enable fast and reliable delivery of change to the business and mitigation of the risk of negatively impacting the stability or integrity of the changed environment. What metrics might you use to measure the performance of this process in each of the 4 dimensions? COBIT describes a change management process whose purpose is to enable fast and reliable delivery of change to the business and mitigation of the risk of negatively impacting the stability or integrity of the changed environment. Okay, that completes this lesson about COBIT 5 Principle 4, Enabling a Holistic Approach. In this lesson, you learned about the COBIT 5 enablers, enabler dimensions, and enabler performance management. The next lesson is Module 2, Lesson 6. In that lesson, you'll learn about COBIT Principle 5, Separating Governance from Management.